On our 5th wedding anniversary, my husband admitted that his secretary was 7 months pregnant. Then he blamed me, saying it wasn't his fault I couldn't have a baby. I spent the entire night quietly packing my things. The next morning, when he saw the signed divorce papers, he completely lost it. The words that spilled from my husband's lips that night weren't just a confession. They were a grenade, detonating the 5 years of our marriage and scattering the shrapnel of a pregnant secretary straight into my heart. The air in our perfectly curated living room, usually a sanctuary of shared dreams, suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. It was a mundane Tuesday evening, the kind meant for quiet conversation, when Daniel delivered his shattering news, his voice barely a whisper, almost defeated. During a business trip, he'd had an affair with his secretary, Chloe, and now, she was 7 months pregnant. My mind spun, grasping for purchase in the suddenly shifting ground beneath me. It felt like I was floating, lost in an empty, painful void. I'm Sophia. For 5 years, Daniel, my husband, had yearned for a child with an almost desperate intensity. Now, tears welled in his eyes, his voice shaky as he pleaded, "Sophia, the baby is already 7 months along. Please, let her keep it." He paused, then in a softer tone added, "I'll walk away with nothing. But please don't take this child away from her." I simply nodded. My thoughts were too jumbled, too broken to form a proper response. "Fine," I managed, the word feeling alien in my mouth. "Let Chloe have the baby." After all, this was the illegitimate child Daniel had begged for, the one he had wanted for so long. It wasn't my place to stand in the way. In our 5 years of marriage, we had never been blessed with a child. At first, I believed some things simply couldn't be forced. If it was meant to happen, it would, in due time. Daniel had once shared this belief, comforting me every time disappointment crept in. "Sophia," he'd say, "don't worry. Good things take time. Our little one is probably just waiting for the perfect moment to surprise us." In those moments, I truly believed him. He was a man who loved children deeply, and his understanding of my heartache was something I cherished. But over the past 2 years, with pressure from his family building, Daniel's attitude began to shift. I started noticing subtle comments about my inability to conceive. Remarks that seemed innocent at first, but gradually became pointed, accusatory. Then, without consulting me, Daniel scheduled an appointment with a renowned gynecologist in Oceanside City. He wanted me to get tested, to find out if something was wrong with me. I was stunned when he brought it up. Anger surged through me, and for the first time in our marriage, I truly lost my temper. "Daniel, if anything, you should be the one to get tested first." My voice shook, but I wasn't backing down. "It's much easier for men than for women. If your results come back normal, then I'll consider it. That's the fairest approach, and the least painful for both of us." As the words left my mouth, Daniel's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing with indignation. His voice rose in protest. "How could I possibly have a problem? It's been 5 years. Are you really not going to consider our future? All I'm asking is for you to get tested. If there's an issue, we can find other ways to have a child. Don't you want to have a baby that belongs to us? One created from our love." I stood frozen, my heart pounding. His words hit me like a slap across the face. He had turned the tables, accusing me of being the one standing in the way of our future, as if he had been the only one trying, the only one sacrificing. For a moment, I couldn't recognize the man standing before me. The gentle, rational, and loving Daniel I had known seemed to have disappeared. The man in front of me now was cold, calculating, and unexpectedly cruel. I took a deep breath, regaining my composure, and replied in a calm but firm tone. "If you're willing to take the test, then I will too." But I refused to accept one-sided suspicion directed at me alone. Daniel's face fell, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of my words had crushed him. He spread his hands helplessly, his lips pressed into a thin line. The warmth that once lived in his eyes had long since disappeared, replaced by an unsettling coldness. From that moment on, Daniel's behavior changed. He started going on business trips more frequently, each one lasting longer than the last. When he was home, His presence was distant, as if his mind was always elsewhere. Even when I shared stories with him, he barely reacted, offering only half-hearted responses. When I asked about his work, hoping to catch a glimpse of his world, he simply smiled and brushed it off. We were no longer even polite acquaintances, just two people bound by marriage, yet growing so far apart that the idea of mutual respect seemed like a distant memory. I foolishly believed it was just a phase, that Daniel's neglect of our home was temporary, a result of his work pressure. I convinced myself it would pass. But that was before the day Daniel came home from yet another business trip. And for the first time in 5 years, I noticed something that made my heart stop. A simple detail that spoke volumes. His wedding ring was gone. That ring, the one I had designed myself. From the first draft to the final design, I had spent over 30 nights meticulously perfecting every detail. Each line, each curve, every facet of the ring was carefully considered. It was as if I was crafting the very foundation of our future together. In my professional world, I was well known for my skill and precision. But when it came to designing my own wedding ring, I found myself no different from a nervous apprentice. The weight of the task hung over me. What if I made a mistake? What if it didn't turn out exactly as I had imagined? Daniel had been with me through the entire process. Night after night, he sat beside me, offering quiet support. Despite knowing nothing about jewelry design, he listened attentively to my every explanation, why I chose this stone, why I favored that setting, and the meaning woven into each intricate design. He understood how much effort went into it. He understood how much love and hope I poured into the ring. But most importantly, he understood the symbolism behind it all, the dreams we had for our life together, captured in that single piece of jewelry. Suppressing the ache that began to swell in my chest, I forced myself to sound casual when I finally asked, "Where's your ring?" Daniel glanced at his left hand, his finger bare, as though noticing it for the first time. His face remained calm, unaffected. After a brief moment, he chuckled softly. "Oh, I took it off when I went swimming last time and forgot to put it back on." I stared at him, my gaze fixed on his face. His words, so casual, so nonchalant, hit me like a punch to the gut. The emptiness in my chest deepened, spreading like a cold wave, chilling every thought, every hope. I could no longer convince myself this was just a phase in our marriage. I could no longer tell myself that he simply forgot. Because Daniel, more than anyone, was a man of details. He noticed the little things always had. If he could forget something as significant as his wedding ring, it meant that something deeper was missing. It meant that he had stopped caring about the very things that ring represented. A wedding ring was never just a detail in a marriage. It was a symbol, a promise. And now that promise seemed fragile, almost non-existent. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. But I knew I had to talk to him. I had to understand what had happened. What had made him start treating our marriage like a mere obligation rather than a commitment? What had changed? What had gone wrong? But before I could gather the courage to speak, before I could even bring up the conversation, something shifted that night. The night I had planned to share my excitement with him, the night I had just learned that the diamond ring I designed had become our company's best-selling piece of the season, was the same night he spoke first. "Sophia," he said, his voice heavy, serious, but devoid of emotion. "I need to tell you something." My heart skipped a beat, my breath catching in my throat. The words that followed felt like a blade slicing through the air. "Chloe, my secretary, she's pregnant. 7 months now. 7 months. My mind raced, processing the words, the time frame. I did the math quickly, the calculations spinning in my head like a whirlwind. That was right after our argument about having children. That was when things began to change between us. When Daniel started to pull away, to drift. The signs had been there all along. If only I had been willing to see them. His apology followed, soft and hollow. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking. It was just that one time, I swear. I've never traveled alone with her since." His voice felt so distant, like it was muffled underwater, drifting far away from me. His words didn't reach me. Not really. They bounced off the walls of my mind, but they didn't ease the pain. My hands shook as I reached for my glass, the trembling so intense that I didn't even realize I had let it slip from my grasp. It crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces, each shard a reflection of the brokenness I felt inside. And as those fragments scattered, so did the last remnants of my breath. My throat tightened. My lungs felt like they were being squeezed, as if someone had wrapped their hands around my neck, choking off the air I so desperately needed. The weight of the words hanging in the room pressed down on me like a heavy, suffocating fog. What did it really mean to be 7 months pregnant? It meant that the due date was only 2 or 3 months away. For Chloe, an employee at Daniel's company, it wasn't something he had just recently discovered. He had known all along. And by not taking any action, he had silently allowed this child to grow to this stage. The betrayal felt even more unbearable, knowing that he had chosen inaction, allowing the pregnancy to progress without regard for how much it would devastate me, Sophia. Chloe tried to terminate the pregnancy last month. Daniel's voice broke the silence, his words hanging in the air like an uncomfortable confession. She and I both wanted to correct our mistake, but it didn't work, he added, almost as if he were trying to make me understand. Her body has been weak ever since. His voice was sincere, his eyes pleading as though he was looking for some form of understanding, some kind of absolution from me. It was clear. He truly believed that his desperate attempt to fix his mistake would somehow redeem him. But did he really think I could be so utterly devoid of self-respect that I would accept another woman's child into my marriage? Did he think I could just forgive him for everything? A failed abortion. What a pathetic lie. His words were just an attempt to show that he had tried to make amends after his infidelity. But the truth was, the baby had been too strong, too determined to be erased. So now here he was, left with no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. The flood of information hit me like a wave, threatening to drown me in its sheer weight. But I forced myself to stay calm, to push my emotions down and keep control. I wouldn't let him see the turmoil inside me. I wouldn't let him see how much this was destroying me. So, Daniel, what exactly do you plan to do? I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the anger or heartbreak that churned within me. When he saw that I wasn't responding with immediate fury, he seemed to relax, thinking that perhaps I was coming around to his reasoning. After a moment of contemplation, he grabbed my hand, his grip eager and excited, and said, "Once she gives birth, we can raise the child as our own." He smiled as if he were offering me some kind of gift. "We'll give her a sum of money and send her far away from Oceanside City." His voice was full of certainty, as if he truly believed this was a reasonable solution, a way to fix everything, to make it all right. This way, she won't have to suffer anymore. Doesn't that sound good? He asked, his eyes hopeful, as though he were waiting for me to agree, to give him the reassurance he craved. At that moment, I could feel my nails digging into my palms. The sharp sting of pain was barely enough to keep me from laughing aloud at the absurdity of it all. It was almost too much to bear. Despite my best efforts to hold it together, my eyes still burned with unshed tears. The injustice of it all threatened to spill over. "Daniel," I said, my voice barely a whisper, thick with unsaid accusations, "you knew all along. You knew how much I struggled with infertility. You knew the emotional toll it took on me, the heartbreak I felt each month when I couldn't conceive. And yet, when you accused me of being selfish for not bearing children, it wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because I couldn't. You knew all of this. And still you chose to betray me, to put another woman's child into our lives, into our marriage. How ridiculous. How utterly pathetic. Daniel, how did you become this person? Or perhaps I never truly saw you for who you were. We had been together for 8 years, since our university days. He had been the student council president, and I was the head of the etiquette department. We had been the perfect couple, the envy of our friends when we first met. He had been shy and uncertain, but over time he had grown into someone who was passionate, devoted, and full of love. We had built our lives together, and I had truly believed that we were soulmates. For 8 years, he had never once faltered as a partner. He had treated me with nothing but kindness and affection. Our friends had all said we were a perfect match, Even my father, notoriously difficult to impress, had spoken highly of him. Everyone had said we were the epitome of love, the couple everyone else should aspire to be, and I had believed them. I had believed that if anyone in this world was meant to be with me, it was Daniel. But now, standing before me was a man who expected me to accept the child he had conceived in betrayal, a child that was the product of his infidelity. And he had the audacity to tell me it was all for my own good, to spare me from suffering. Daniel, when you wear a mask for too long, taking it off will tear your skin. Seeing you in this pathetic state now, it's nothing short of disgusting. There was no way in hell I would ever accept this. Would ever allow myself to be the woman who tolerated such a betrayal. There was no forgiveness in my heart. Not for this, not for him. If Daniel had managed to persuade Chloe to have his child, there must have been a promise, a temptation, something that would have coaxed her into agreeing. I could almost hear the words he must have whispered in her ear. Soft and convincing, just give birth to the child and I'll divorce my wife. Now here he was offering to let us raise the baby as if that would somehow keep me in check, as if the mere thought of it would erase the resentment I felt toward Chloe, especially while she was still pregnant. He must have believed that by eliminating any threat I might pose, he could somehow keep everything under control. Daniel, you really have it all calculated, don't you? Every angle, every move, all designed to maintain your perfect little facade. Even now, you're trying to spin it all as an unfortunate accident, some drunken mistake, an unexpected pregnancy, a failed abortion, just to protect your carefully crafted image from crumbling. How thoughtful of you. I didn't bother answering his question directly. There was no need. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate breath, wiping away the tear that had escaped the corner of my eye. My fingers lingered on my skin for a moment before I looked up at him with a serene, almost gentle expression. Then make sure you properly compensate Chloe for everything she's been through. I whispered softly, my voice calm but edged with something darker, something he couldn't quite read. Daniel froze, his expression faltering for just a second. But then, seeing my controlled demeanor, his tense features finally relaxed. And he smiled, a smile that felt as rehearsed as his every other move. He stepped closer, the familiar warmth of his embrace wrapping around me. But there was something cold beneath it. Sophia, he murmured, his voice low and soothing. Don't overthink this, that baby is ours. Thank you for supporting my decision. I responded, my voice quiet, almost too agreeable. But inside, everything was shifting. My heart felt like it was sinking into something deeper, something colder. I wasn't just supporting his decision. I was quietly plotting my own. A few days later, I arranged a full medical examination, keeping it to myself. There was no need to tell anyone. Not Daniel, not anyone. I didn't need their approval or interference. I needed answers. A week later, the results came in and the truth was right there, printed on the page. Every indicator was perfectly normal. There was no sign of infertility, no issues with conception. As I held the test results in my hands, a quiet relief washed over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a heavy realization. This could only mean one thing. There was a very high chance that the child in Chloe's womb wasn't Daniel's at all. I stared at the paper, the weight of it sinking in. 5 years of marriage, and we had never conceived, yet they had succeeded on the very first try. The irony was almost laughable. What were they supposed to be? Two perfectly matched opposites, destined to come together and create life? It seemed like a cruel joke. My mind wandered back to that day, to the way Daniel had reacted when I first asked him to get checked. How he had been so confident, so sure that he couldn't possibly be the problem. Almost like he was hiding something. A secret buried deep beneath the surface. Daniel, I thought, if you want a child so badly that you'd betray our marriage, abandon every ounce of morality, and deceive everyone around you, then fine. I'll give you what you want, and I'll make sure you get exactly what you deserve. Later, when Chloe came looking for me, I was sitting at the cafe downstairs, surrounded by the scattered papers of the post-nuptial property agreement. The weight of the paperwork was a constant reminder of the mess that Daniel had created, but there was no turning back now. After Daniel's confession, we had spoken once. I had told him that while I was willing to consider his proposal, I couldn't just overlook the betrayal. I couldn't simply forgive him. It was too much, too sudden, too much to simply accept and move on from. I could still see the look on his face, the guilt in his eyes when I spoke. He had been filled with regret, shame, the kind of sorrow that only came when a person realized they truly lost something important. With reddened eyes, he had looked at me, his voice cracking as he pleaded. Sophia, I was wrong. I really was. If you can forgive me, I'll do anything to make it up to you. He had sworn as though he thought that would be enough. I had looked at him calmly, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the fragility of the moment, but I refused to show it. Right now, I feel incredibly insecure. But because I truly love you, I'm willing to trust you one more time, I had said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Daniel, looking as though he had been given a second chance at life, had sworn to me with utmost sincerity, Sophia, I will never betray you again. But inside, I knew I had to take control of the situation. The truth was, I no longer trusted him. I wasn't too sure if I ever would again, but there was something deeper driving me now. Something beyond forgiveness, something I would see through to the end, no matter where it led. I nodded, as if reassured by his words. But then, as though something had just crossed my mind, I looked at Daniel with a measured expression and suggested, Daniel, if you truly want to ease my worries and make me feel more secure, how about transferring our jointly owned fixed assets to my name? The words hung in the air, and I watched as Daniel's expression stiffened slightly. A flicker of hesitation crossing his face. But I didn't give him any time to think or react. I pressed on, determined to make him understand my need for reassurance. Daniel, I genuinely want to continue our life together. That's why I'm only asking for this arrangement to give me some peace of mind. I paused, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. If I truly wanted to leave you, I could just file for divorce instead. It's not like I'm trapped here. We've been together for 8 years. I can't just let go that easily. I will accept this child and raise them as my own. I'm willing to give you another chance. As the words left my lips, my voice trembled slightly, betraying the raw emotion I had tried so hard to suppress. A single tear slipped down my cheek, and I quickly wiped it away, my composure faltering for just a moment. Daniel, who had initially hesitated, fell silent. The room seemed to grow heavy with the tension between us. His gaze was fixed on the floor, his mind seemingly at war with itself. I could tell that he was processing what I had just said, weighing the implications of my request. But eventually, after a long pause, he spoke. He chose to believe in the woman he had spent 8 years with, the one who had always been obedient and reasonable. He believed I couldn't possibly turn the tables on him, that everything was still under his control. Oh, how arrogant he was. A week later, Daniel transferred all the fixed assets we had acquired after marriage into my name, and the documents were officially notarized. He did it partly out of guilt, but mostly to keep me from leaving. He was afraid. Afraid that if I realized too soon that I might be cast aside, I would do something drastic. So, with this gesture, he tried to placate me, to keep me from making any decisions he couldn't control. When Chloe showed up today, I knew this moment had come. I deliberately slowed my movements as I gathered my paperwork, ensuring that the notarized documents were left in plain sight on the table. I wanted her to see them, to feel the weight of what Daniel had just done. She sat down across from me, her expression neutral at first, but as soon as her eyes landed on the papers, her face tightened. The change was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. Her entire demeanor darkened in an instant. Daniel gave you all the properties, she asked, her tone laced with barely concealed anger, her eyes narrowing. I smiled at her, my expression calm, almost amused. I wanted to show her that I was unshaken, that her anger couldn't touch me. It's just some compensation, that's all, I replied coolly. Why are you here, Chloe? For a moment, Chloe said nothing. She absently ran her heavily adorned fingers over her round belly, her gaze flickering toward me as if trying to gauge my reaction. But when she saw how unbothered I was, disappointment flickered in her eyes. Her fingers tightened slightly around her cup, and she seemed to deflate, the confident air she had once held slipping away. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of silence, she spoke, her voice soft but deliberate. "Sister, I came here today to apologize to you." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden shift in tone. Chloe's apology felt almost too calculated, too measured, but I remained silent, letting her continue. "I've been pregnant with Daniel's child for 7 months now," she said, her voice timid, but her hand never stopped caressing her belly in that deliberate, almost provocative motion. I gave her a small nod, my face betraying nothing. I calmly lifted my coffee cup to my lips and took a sip. "He already told me," I said, my voice smooth. "Since you're 7 months along, you should focus on taking care of yourself." I let the silence stretch for a moment before adding, "If it's a Robinson child, I'm sure Daniel's parents will be very welcoming." I deliberately emphasized the words, "a Robinson child," and lifted my gaze to observe her reaction. For a split second, I saw Chloe stiffen, her fingers tightened around her cup. Her knuckles whitening, but it was a fleeting moment, quickly masked by her usual composed exterior. She recovered quickly, her eyes lowering slightly as she adjusted her posture. "Of course, it's Daniel's child. What else would it be?" she replied, her voice firm, though a slight tremor of uncertainty lingered beneath her words. I placed my cup down, nodding slightly, acknowledging her confidence, or rather the lack of it. She sounded so certain, her expression steady once more. Yet, deep down, I knew the truth. After sneaking around with Daniel for so long, she must have assumed there was no doubt that the child was his. How unfortunate for her that Daniel turned out to be so unreliable. Not long after my meeting with Chloe, I received a message from my friend Hannah. A while ago, I had asked her to help me look into something. Hannah worked at the company's headquarters, while Daniel was the CEO of a subsidiary. Though they weren't in the same office, getting information about the branch company wasn't difficult for her. She had been making discreet inquiries within the administration department. And after a few days of careful digging, she uncovered something that made my blood run cold. 8 months ago, Chloe had a boyfriend. In fact, many people had seen this man picking Chloe up from work on multiple occasions, but for some reason, they broke up. Not long after the breakup, Chloe resigned from her position, citing personal reasons. It seemed like a straightforward departure, but whispers quickly spread around the office. There were murmurs that her resignation was not just about personal matters, but that she was pregnant. Naturally, everyone assumed the child was Daniel's. The rumors ran rampant, and I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach whenever I heard them. Hannah, ever perceptive, hesitated for a moment before speaking up. "Sophia, why are you looking into this?" Her voice was gentle but laced with concern. I could see the flicker of understanding in her eyes, and I knew she had already pieced together what was going on. A wife investigating her husband's pregnant former secretary. What other reason could there be? Seeing the heaviness in my expression, Hannah let out a quiet sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken words. "Sophia," she said softly, "if you need anything at all, just tell me. I'll do whatever I can to help you." Her words were a lifeline, a soft tether pulling me back from the edge of my spiraling thoughts. After everything I had been through, I thought I had become numb to the weight of emotions. Yet, in that moment, her sincerity cut through the cold shell I had built around myself. It was like a small flicker of warmth in a dark room. "Thank you, Hannah," I said, my voice softer than before, almost tentative, as if the words themselves carried the weight of my vulnerability. "I do need your help with something." Hannah's hand gently settled over mine, her touch reassuring. "Tell me what you need," she said, her tone filled with quiet strength. "I'll do my best." I lowered my gaze, my fingers instinctively tracing the outline of my wedding ring. The cold metal felt heavy against my skin, a constant reminder of everything that had changed. A bitter smile tugged at my lips as I looked at it. "Can you find out more about Chloe's ex-boyfriend?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hannah didn't hesitate. For someone as socially adept as her, tracking down a person within Oceanside City's professional circles would be nothing more than a matter of making a few calls. I could already imagine how easily she would navigate through the web of connections. That morning, after the new quarter's product development meeting had wrapped up, I suddenly felt unwell. I left the office early, telling everyone I needed to rest for the day. The tension in my chest was unbearable, and I needed some time to collect my thoughts. As I stepped out of the elevator and walked toward my apartment, I was caught off guard by an unexpected sound. Voices, raised voices, drifted out from behind the door. The unmistakable sound of a heated argument filled the air, sharp and unnerving. I stopped in my tracks, my hand hovering over the keypad of the smart lock. The familiar click of the lock in my fingers now feeling distant. I strained to hear through the door, and then I caught the first words. "You actually put all the properties under Sophia's name. Then what will I have left after marrying you?" Chloe's voice was high-pitched, shrill with desperation. Inside, Daniel was silent, but the tension in the air was palpable. Hearing this, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at my lips. So, my carefully planted information had worked. Chloe had taken the bait. She was upset about the prenuptial property agreements, just as I had expected. "Come on, Chloe." Daniel's voice broke through, laced with frustration. "It's just some houses. I have other assets." A loud crash suddenly echoed from inside, followed by the unmistakable sound of porcelain shattering. My heart skipped a beat. What was happening in there? Then came a bitter, mocking laugh from Chloe. "What do you think, Daniel? I've been suffering through pregnancy for 10 months and I get nothing? While that woman does absolutely nothing and walks away with a dozen properties under your name. You think I'm an idiot?" I pressed my hand to my lips, barely able to suppress a laugh. For someone I once thought of as a master manipulator, Chloe was surprisingly impatient. She had leverage. She still had the upper hand in the negotiations, but here she was throwing it all away in a fit of rage. It was almost childish. The argument escalated, the words becoming more frantic, more desperate. Chloe's voice cracked as she began to cry louder and louder, her sobs filling the space between the walls. Then, through the noise, I heard something that made my eyebrows shoot up in surprise. "I'll abort this baby right now." Chloe's voice trembled with raw emotion. "I'll make sure you never have children again." I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. Oh, that was a line she should never have crossed. Because if there was one thing Daniel valued above all else, it was having a child. And just as I predicted, the air seemed to still. Everything went silent. And then, slap. A sharp slap rang through the room, so loud it seemed to echo in my chest. The unmistakable sound of a struggle followed. The bookshelf shifted, scraping against the floor as if everything inside was in chaos. Then, just as abruptly, everything fell silent. Chloe's cries, her protests, all of it stopped. The stillness was suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen in the hallway, my mind racing. What had just happened? What had I just witnessed? "Enough, Chloe." Daniel's voice was as cold as ice. "If you dare to get rid of this child, I will make sure your entire family suffers the consequences." I could almost picture the expression on his face. Those once gentle eyes now sharp and merciless. Chloe didn't utter another word. She knew all too well that Daniel had the power to back up his threats. After that day, something subtle shifted in Daniel's behavior toward me. He started coming home on time, avoiding unnecessary business trips, and even began giving me gifts again on special occasions, gestures that had long since disappeared from our lives. At first, I couldn't help but notice the shift in his behavior. The effort he was suddenly putting into maintaining an illusion of normalcy. I played along, feigning cooperation, though every part of me knew exactly what was happening. Daniel had once planned to divorce me after the baby was born, then marry the young and beautiful Chloe, the woman who had caused this whole mess. But things had started to change. After witnessing Chloe's recent breakdowns and seeing how I had transformed into the picture of understanding and obedience, Daniel was reconsidering. He was realizing that maybe the easy solution wasn't the best one. His sudden shift in attitude meant something. It likely meant that he was genuinely planning to take the child, pay Chloe off, and cut ties with her entirely, as if doing so would erase his mistakes and spare him any further consequences. But I knew that wasn't enough for me. While this outcome might seem to work in my favor, it wasn't the ending I truly desired. Not even close. As Chloe's due date neared, I found myself encouraging Daniel to visit her more often. It wasn't because I had suddenly accepted the child. No, that wasn't it at all. I wanted him to invest more of his emotions and energy into this baby, to bind himself to it, so that when everything eventually fell apart, his disappointment would be that much more crushing. To my surprise, Daniel seemed reluctant. Even with Chloe so close to giving birth, he showed no interest in visiting her. His indifference spoke volumes. His disdain for her had grown so deep that he couldn't bring himself to even be near her. "Darling," I said softly one evening, placing my hand gently over his as we sat together on the couch. "Chloe's child is our child, too." He glanced at me, frowning, and I continued, choosing my words carefully. If I were the one visiting and taking care of her, she might feel uncomfortable. Our relationship is complicated. So, in this situation, you're the only one who can step up. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but I quickly added, "You should spend more time with them. It'll help you bond with the baby before he comes home to us." Daniel hesitated, his brow furrowing as if he were wrestling with the idea. But after a moment, his expression softened, and as I expected, he pulled me into his arms, his chin gently brushing against my forehead, a fleeting gesture of affection. "You're still as understanding as ever after all these years," he murmured, the words laden with a touch of sorrow. "If only we could have a child of our own, that would be wonderful." His voice cracked slightly, as if the thought of what we might have had, what we could have shared, was slipping further out of reach. There was a deep regret in his words, a genuine longing. But it only made me more aware of the gap between us. As I leaned against his shoulder, I could feel the tension building in my chest, my expression darkened, my thoughts heavy with the truth. I could no longer ignore Daniel. "I should thank the heavens for revealing your true nature to me. If I ever had a child with someone like you, it would be the greatest stain on my life." At 39 weeks pregnant, Chloe gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Inside the hospital room, Daniel's parents' voices filled the air, their joyful chatter drowning out the newborn's cries. Their excitement spilled out into the hallway where I stood alone, leaning against the cold wall, my face calm, betraying none of the turmoil inside. I should have known. Daniel's parents had likely been aware of this child's existence from the very beginning. From the start, they had conspired with Daniel and Chloe, turning a blind eye to the betrayal that had tainted everything. And now they were here celebrating the birth of a child they had chosen to ignore the origins of. As I stood there, an old memory surfaced, one from the day of my wedding. The memory of kneeling before Daniel's parents, offering them tea as tradition dictated. Daniel's mother had been overwhelmed with emotion that day. Her tears had glistened in her eyes and her voice had trembled as she struggled to find the right words. But now, as I listened to her laugh in the hospital room, her joy echoing down the hallway, I couldn't help but wonder, had all of that emotion been real, or had it been a performance for my benefit? Friends and family had watched in awe, whispering among themselves, "This is the first time I've ever seen a mother-in-law cry out of sheer happiness when hearing her daughter-in-law call her mom for the first time." After we married, Daniel's mother took pride in introducing me at every elite gathering in Oceanside City. With a beaming smile, she would tell everyone, "This is my daughter-in-law, Sophia. She's kind, intelligent, and the lead designer at Starlight Jewelry. Daniel is incredibly lucky to have married her." Back then, everyone believed it, including me. Everyone thought I, Sophia, had a near-perfect marriage, a successful and devoted husband, kind and loving in-laws. But looking at the situation now, what a cruel joke that was. Pushing those thoughts aside, I knocked on the door and stepped inside, placing the freshly made soup on the table. Just as I was about to turn and leave, Chloe's voice stopped me. Seeing me pause, she turned to Daniel's parents with a deliberately sweet and obedient smile. "Mom, Dad, could you step out for a moment? I have something to discuss with Sophia." Daniel's parents hesitated briefly, their expressions shifting with unease. After a moment of silence, they eventually nodded and left the room, though the awkwardness and worry in their eyes were unmistakable. I understood their concern. They were afraid that if Chloe and I were left alone in the same room, something unexpected might happen. The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. How quickly the warmth of family could turn cold. As soon as the door clicked shut, Chloe's gentle demeanor vanished. Her gaze sharpened into a cold, triumphant glare. Sophia, you've already lost. Mom and Dad just told me they're ready to have Daniel file for divorce. Did you really think he was going to take the child and raise it as yours? That was just a temporary excuse to pacify you. Now that the baby is safely born, you're no longer needed. Enjoy your last days as Mrs. Robinson while you still can. She spoke like a victor standing over the defeated, delivering her final verdict. But her taunts barely stirred any emotion in me. Calmly, I ladled the soup into a bowl. The insulation was good, the steam still curled upwards in the air. I glanced up at Chloe. Her complexion was dull and shallow. Her once youthful glow completely drained. Childbirth had aged her visibly and significantly. She was 3 years younger than me. Yet now she looked older by at least 5. I didn't bother arguing with her. Instead, my gaze shifted to the baby in her arms. His skin was noticeably darker, almost unnaturally so. Daniel had been fair-skinned since childhood, and Chloe, before her pregnancy, had always been pale and delicate. Yet this baby, if he got any darker, he might as well be from an entirely different lineage. I arched a brow slightly, then smirked, my voice deliberately taunting. Oh, Chloe, I hope you're not getting ahead of yourself. Brag all you want after you actually set foot in the Robinson household. Otherwise, you're just working hard to prepare my victory gown for me. My words struck a nerve. Chloe's eyes filled with hatred, her entire expression twisting with malice. A sudden wave of unease crept over me, and sure enough, Chloe's fingers suddenly tightened around the baby's tiny arm. A sharp pinch. In an instant, angry red marks bloomed on the delicate skin. The baby's cries filled the entire hospital room right on cue. Daniel's parents burst back in, panic written all over their faces. Before I could even process what had happened, Chloe's voice rang out, shaken, distressed, and dripping with accusation. Mom, Dad, you have to stand up for us. Sophia said she wanted to see the baby, but the moment I looked away, she pinched him. Look, his arm is swollen. My in-laws immediately pushed past me, rushing to examine the child, and the moment they saw the red marks, Daniel's mother's expression darkened. The warmth she once had for me was completely gone. In its place, resentment and disappointment. I shook my head slightly, silently, denying the accusation. But I already knew the truth wouldn't matter because to them, between their daughter-in-law of many years and a mother who had just given birth, they would always believe that a mother would never harm her own child. As the baby's cries echoed, Daniel's mother inhaled slowly, pausing for a moment before speaking in a low, measured tone. Sophia, you've seen it yourself all these years, and you still haven't been able to bear a child. Although we truly like you as our daughter-in-law, we cannot ignore certain pressures. Now that Chloe has given birth to Daniel's son, we want to offer you some compensation. Even if you divorce Daniel, we will always be family. Hearing this, the tension in my heart finally eased. Then, unable to hold back, I let out a soft chuckle. Her grandson had just been born, and she wasted no time getting straight to the point. How typical. A family so hypocritical, so indifferent. I didn't bother responding to Daniel's mother's so-called words of comfort. Instead, I lifted the bowl of soup I had just poured and downed it in one go. Mom, this fish soup, you taught me how to make it 4 years ago. I have always respected and cherished you. But today, this will be the last time I call you Mom. There's no need to talk about family anymore. Goodbye. 1 week later, Daniel came to me with the divorce papers sooner than I had expected. I had deliberately provoked Chloe during my visit to her hospital room last week, intending to pressure her into pushing Daniel to divorce me as soon as possible. I needed him to feel the deepest guilt when negotiating our divorce, ensuring that I received the maximum share of assets. Otherwise, with the way Daniel was growing increasingly frustrated and helpless toward Chloe, I genuinely feared he might choose to keep the baby but discard the mother. Fortunately, Chloe and Daniel's parents did not disappoint me. I looked up at Daniel, my face carrying the same familiar, gentle smile. But he looked utterly exhausted. His usually well-groomed hair was unkempt, hanging messily over his forehead. The dark circles beneath his eyes were evident behind his gold-rimmed glasses. His entire demeanor exuded fatigue. Daniel clutched the divorce papers tightly, his gaze shifting between the document and me, his expression conflicted and pained. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I swear I never wanted to divorce you, but I had no choice. Chloe is threatening me with the baby. My parents are siding with her, pressuring me endlessly, so I had no other option." He slowly pushed the divorce agreement toward me. Lowering my gaze, I focused on the asset division section. Since we had already notarized the property under my name after marriage, there was no dispute there. 15 properties across various locations and 7 luxury cars. As for Daniel's savings and company shares, he had written an 80-20 split, 80% to me, 20% to him. That genuinely surprised me. I had consulted a divorce lawyer beforehand. In cases where one spouse is at fault, they typically received 10% to 20% less in the settlement. I had planned to contact my lawyer and fight for at least 70% if Daniel's offer was anything lower. But now, this arrangement saved me the trouble. Just as I picked up the pen to sign, Daniel suddenly grabbed my hand. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, and his voice trembled with emotion. "Sophia, I know you've suffered during this time. I truly thought everything would go as I planned, but Chloe has been threatening me every day. She says if we don't divorce, she'll jump off a building with the baby." I had no choice. "Regarding the financial compensation, don't worry, I will transfer everything to your name immediately. And in the future, if you don't have children of your own, you can treat our son as yours." A wave of disgust surged through me. I withdrew my hand from his grasp, my expression cold and indifferent. "There's no need for that, Mr. Robinson. From now on, take care of yourself." With that, I picked up the divorce papers and walked away without looking back. Daniel had no idea if I ever wanted a child, I would have one of my own. But as for him, that was no longer an option. Over the next 2 weeks, I sold off all the company shares Daniel had allocated to me at a high price. The profits were significant. As I stared at my bank account balance, I couldn't suppress a satisfied smile. I received a message from Caleb Sullivan, Chloe's ex-boyfriend. In fact, the week Chloe gave birth, Hannah had already tracked him down, but at the time, I chose not to meet him right away. I told Hannah to wait until my divorce was finalized. Now that the company shares had been sold, the timing was perfect. When I finally met Caleb, I didn't bother with pleasantries. His appearance was rugged and unrefined, resembling someone from a remote countryside, a far cry from what I had expected. I sat across from Caleb and pulled a photograph from my bag. In it, Chloe was holding a baby, standing alongside the Robinson family. Caleb glanced at the picture, but showed little reaction. He recognized Chloe, but his response was indifferent. "We've already broken up. This has nothing to do with me." I let out a sigh, resisting the urge to roll my eyes at his obliviousness. Still, I kept my patience and nudged him further. "If we go by the timeline, Chloe got pregnant around August of last year. At that time, were you absolutely certain you had already broken up? Or, to put it more bluntly, are you sure you didn't sleep together after that?" Caleb's brows furrowed slightly. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if sifting through his memories. Then realization dawned on him. "Wait, are you saying this child might be mine?" I gave him a firm nod. Caleb stared at me, stunned, before slowly lowering his gaze back to the photograph. He sat frozen for a long time, his fingers tightening around the edges of the picture as he examined it over and over again. Then, suddenly, as if something clicked in his mind, he pulled out his phone. He scrolled quickly through his screen before handing it to me. I looked down. A long list of hotel booking records filled the screen. Most of them were from the summer of last year, between July and September. The dates aligned almost perfectly with the periods when Daniel and Chloe had returned from their business trips to Oceanside City. So Chloe had been keeping herself busy traveling with Daniel for work, then coming back to meet up with Caleb. I methodically took screenshots of every page and saved them to my phone. Then, turning back to Caleb, I proposed a deal. I can tell you the truth, but you have to promise not to mention my involvement. Caleb nodded without hesitation. All right, I said. That boy is yours, 100%. The man in this picture, he used to be my husband, but he has fertility issues. It's impossible for him to have gotten Chloe pregnant. Of course, I wasn't actually 100% certain, but I needed Caleb's fury to work in my favor. The moment my words landed, bang. Caleb slammed his fist onto the table. The quiet, mild-mannered man before me was gone. His face twisted with rage, his entire demeanor turning aggressive. Where are they? The fury in his voice was unmistakable. I had heard that men from rural or traditional backgrounds took bloodlines and heirs very seriously. And seeing Caleb's explosive reaction, especially his visible shift in expression when I mentioned the boy, only confirmed those rumors. Without hesitation, I handed him the addresses of Chloe's postpartum care center and Daniel's company. Caleb gripped the paper so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He was clearly seething, barely keeping his emotions in check. Yet before storming off, he still managed to turn back and thank me. After all, if I hadn't revealed the truth, he might have never known that he had a biological son, one that Chloe had been using as her golden ticket to wealth. The next time I heard about Chloe and Daniel, it was from the local trending news. I clicked on the leaked report, and there he was, Caleb, standing in front of Daniel's company headquarters and the postpartum center, holding up a massive banner. The words written across it were bold and impossible to miss. Company CEO Daniel and my ex-girlfriend Chloe. Return my son to me. Seeing this, I couldn't hold back my laughter. I scrolled down to the comment section. Over 1,000 comments had already flooded in. Most of them said the same thing, just get a paternity test. Nothing else matters. Honestly though, that kid looks nothing like the CEO. He's way too dark-skinned. No test needed. We already know who the real father is. Apart from the paternity test, others began to speak out, saying, Daniel just divorced his ex-wife in July, and the child was already born by then. It's clear that the affair is undeniable. This CEO looks so familiar. Why do I feel like I've seen him at a urology clinic? At this point, my fingers froze. A urology clinic. If what this netizen was saying is true, Daniel must have known from the start that his fertility was an issue. Yet, he still went on to make all these despicable choices. The public uproar quickly gained momentum, and the trending topic shot to the top of the local news charts in Oceanside City overnight. The company's stock price plummeted. I looked at the substantial sum of money in my bank account and couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was exactly why I hadn't contacted Caleb before the wedding. If Caleb found out, he would have immediately caused a scene. And if I had divorced Daniel afterward, the shares I would have received would have already lost much of their value. But now, after selling the shares at a high price, I could finally let Caleb make a fuss. This was the best course of action. The trending topic stayed at the top of the local news for an entire day and night before finally losing some of its heat. At that point, Hannah came to me with the latest gossip. Did you hear, Sophia? The child really isn't Daniel's. Yesterday's drama caused such a stir. So many people went to that maternity center just to watch the chaos. Daniel must be completely furious, insisting on having the paternity test done. Word is the secretary almost jumped out of the maternity center window to avoid the test. And when the results came in, the Robinson family looked absolutely pale. As Hannah spoke, she pulled out her phone and opened a group chat called Oceanside City Gossip. There were dozens of videos shared in the chat. One video, lasting about 20 minutes, showed Chloe, disheveled and wearing a hospital gown, kneeling and grabbing Daniel's sleeve, begging him not to conduct the paternity test in front of everyone. Daniel kicked her away, even stepping on her stomach a few times with his eyes bloodshot. He used the foulest language to insult her. Daniel's parents just stood by, silently wiping away their tears. About 5 minutes later, Chloe suddenly rushed toward the window as if she had lost her mind. She tried to jump from the 8th floor. It was only with the help of the onlookers that she was stopped before she could go through with it. But she kept shouting, "You useless man. No wonder you and Sophia couldn't have a child after 5 years. You blame me for cheating, but you're the one who's broken. Pathetic. Which woman would ever have a child with you, Daniel? You'll never have heirs in this life." Hannah laughed uncontrollably, leaning closer to me as she continued. There's another video where Daniel receives the paternity test results. In the video, Daniel held the test report. His face dark and grim. He then tore the report to shreds, furiously punching the wall of the hospital. The punch caused his hand to bleed. Meanwhile, Chloe, sitting nearby, looked like a woman in her 40s or 50s. Her eyes vacant and her skin a dull yellow. In her early 20s, her face had already begun to sag beyond recognition. She stared blankly out the window, completely indifferent to the noisy crowd of onlookers and reporters. Hannah snickered, mocking. Now Daniel's been cuckolded, his reputation in ruins, double trouble for him. Chloe's dreams of entering high society are shattered. And now everyone's mocking her. Hilarious. Seeing this, I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy inside. In just a few months, I had gone from being the one betrayed and discarded by the Robinsons to now holding the majority of the Robinson family's assets. And I had also gotten rid of a husband who was nothing but a useless, infertile man. With that thought in mind, I smiled and put my arm around Hannah. Come on, sis. Let's go on a trip to Northern Europe to celebrate. After all, the money I had now was enough for several lifetimes of spending. By the time Hannah and I returned from our trip abroad, Oceanside City had already entered the second spring of the year. Those wild days in Northern Europe had finally allowed me to unwind, to release the tension I had been carrying since the start of the year. Looking back, I can't help but shudder at how vulnerable I was. Facing the schemes of the Robinson family and Chloe alone, one wrong move could have trapped me in an endless quagmire. But thankfully, I managed to hold my ground. However, so much had happened in Oceanside City during the 5 months we were away. Daniel, caught up in his affair before the wedding, was fired from his job at the Oceanside Corporation for mishandling personal matters. The scandal destroyed his career and the industry blacklisted him completely. In his fury, Daniel directed all his anger at Chloe. Neighbors of the Robinsons reported seeing Chloe battered and bruised, going out to buy groceries, and late into the night, the sounds of domestic violence echoed from their home. During our trip, I had received a call from Daniel's mother. Her voice was trembling, full of tears as she pleaded for help, asking if I could send some money to assist them. She told me Daniel couldn't handle the blow and had been drinking and wandering aimlessly. Recently, he'd been diagnosed with a difficult-to-treat illness. Chloe, too, had suffered a mental breakdown and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Now both of them needed money for treatment, but the Robinson family had already been drained dry and couldn't afford it. I listened to Daniel's mother's cries, but I didn't offer much of a response. I gave a few short answers and ended the call. To be honest, by the time I heard this, I had no sympathy for them. Instead, I found a strange sense of satisfaction in their misery, almost like a form of entertainment. Daniel and Chloe's fate was what they deserved. Whatever they went through next, I no longer cared. I would only focus on myself. In the following days, I turned my attention to designing my new quarterly collection, a starry-themed ring for single women. When I was married, my designs focused mainly on wedding bands. But now that I was divorced, my focus had shifted. This change in my identity brought new thoughts and inspirations. I wanted to encourage other women facing difficulties in marriage or relationships to be brave and embrace a single woman's ring. A single woman's ring is a great idea, but why the star theme? Stars always accompany the moon. It doesn't seem to reflect the core concept of female independence and self-sufficiency. I almost found myself at a loss for words. But then suddenly, I remembered the sky full of stars I had seen in Northern Europe. Actually, I explained, most stars are independent celestial bodies, shining with their own light. They don't rely on the moon to exist. Just like you and me, we are independent individuals. We don't need to rely on anyone or any relationship to define our existence. My words seemed to resonate with the group, and the idea of a starry-themed single woman's ring began to take shape in a new light. The room fell silent for a moment as my words hung in the air. I could see the faces around the table, some with a hint of surprise, others with new understanding. The atmosphere shifted from doubt to curiosity, and I could feel the energy of the meeting changing. One of the senior designers, a woman who had been skeptical at first, leaned forward. I see what you're saying now. It's not just about the star design. It's about empowerment. It's about showing women that they can shine on their own without needing anyone else to validate their worth. She smiled, her tone warmer than before. Encouraged by her response, I continued, my voice steady and confident. Exactly. This ring isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's a symbol for every woman who has walked away from a relationship that didn't serve her. For every woman who has chosen herself over societal expectations. This ring will be a reminder that she is enough on her own. The others nodded, some taking notes, others exchanging glances that spoke volumes. I could tell that the idea was finally beginning to take hold. The theme wasn't just a design concept. It was a message. A message I was passionate about, something that came from my own journey, my own transformation. The rest of the meeting went smoothly. Ideas flowed more freely, and everyone seemed energized by the new direction. As we wrapped up, the design team was already brainstorming ways to bring the starry-themed ring to life. And I could sense a real excitement in the air. As I walked out of the meeting room, I felt a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the designs anymore. It was about creating something meaningful, something that could make a difference in the lives of women. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly on the right path. I had started this journey unsure of myself, unsure of my future. But now, with each step I took, I was becoming the woman I had always wanted to be. Strong, independent, and unapologetically myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest design of all. I'm still processing this entire journey, but I've found my strength. If something like this happened to you, what would your next move be? Let me know in the comments below.